This is Rise, where truth is uncovered and black stories rise from silence to strength. Real voices, bold truth, unshakable legacy. Welcome to Rise. What happens when a racist coach challenges the wrong black woman to a fight? In front of dozens of witnesses, Coach Dalton pointed directly at Nia Carter and bellowed, "How about you come down here and spar with me? Let's show everyone how a regular person handles a real martial arts challenge." The crowd erupted in laughter. Parents exchanged amused glances. Students smirked, expecting an easy victory for their respected instructor. But what they witnessed next would shatter every assumption they'd ever made. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look? Have you ever walked into a room where people immediately sized you up and decided you didn't belong? Maybe it was your skin color, your age, your gender, or just the way you carried yourself. Has someone ever treated you like you were less capable, less intelligent, or less worthy simply because of their prejudices? If you're nodding right now, then you understand exactly what Nia Carter faced every single day at Harmony Martial Arts Academy. Here's a 42-year-old single mother, quietly bringing her son Dre to training sessions, always respectful, always humble. To everyone watching, she was just another parent on the sidelines, invisible, unremarkable, certainly not someone who belonged in the ring with a seasoned martial arts instructor. Coach Dalton had made it his personal mission to remind Nia of her place. Subtle comments, condescending smiles, the kind of disrespect that's delivered with a grin, making it impossible to call out without seeming overly sensitive. For months, she endured his microaggressions, his dismissive attitude, his need to make her feel small in front of her own son. But what this coach didn't know would change everything. What he didn't know was that standing before him wasn't just any ordinary woman. What he couldn't see beneath her quiet demeanor was a past so extraordinary, so legendary, that whispers of her name once sent shivers through opponents across the country. If you're ready to witness one of the most shocking moments, smash that like button right now and hit subscribe, because this story will leave you speechless. The Harmony Martial Arts Academy buzzed with its usual energy that autumn afternoon. Blue mats stretched across polished wooden floors, the sound of gloves hitting pads echoed through the spacious gym, and the air hung thick with anticipation. Nobody could have predicted that this ordinary Tuesday would become the day everything changed. What happened next? Let me tell you about the silent storm. Nia Carter juggled 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and pay for her son's martial arts training. Working double shifts as a hospital cleaner, weekend catering gigs, and late-night data entry, she sacrificed everything to give 12-year-old Dre opportunities she never had growing up. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she'd arrive at the academy still wearing her work uniform, exhausted but determined to support her son's passion. While other parents chatted in their designer athletic wear, Nia sat quietly in the corner, sometimes catching up on paperwork between cheering for Dre. She never complained, never drew attention to herself, never mentioned that the monthly training fees stretched their budget to the breaking point. But Coach Dalton noticed her anyway, for all the wrong reasons. Dalton had built his reputation over 15 years at Harmony Martial Arts Academy. Former state champion, certified instructor, the kind of man who commanded respect through intimidation rather than inspiration. His students feared disappointing him more than they feared getting hurt. To parents paying premium rates for their children's training, Dalton represented excellence. His classes were packed, his waiting list months long. But beneath the polished exterior lived a man who measured people's worth by their bank accounts and zip codes. When Nia first enrolled Dre, Dalton's eyes scanned her secondhand clothes, her beaten-up Honda in the parking lot, her quiet demeanor during parent meetings. He filed her away as charity case material, someone he'd tolerate as long as she stayed invisible. The microaggressions started small. Comments about certain people not understanding martial arts discipline. Suggestions that Dre might be more comfortable in community center programs. Questions about whether Nia could really afford tournament entry fees delivered with a condescending smile. When Nia asked about scholarship opportunities, Dalton's response dripped with false concern. We want to make sure our standards remain consistent. Not everyone is cut out for our level of training. Tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with someone who made you feel like you didn't belong? Someone who used their position of authority to make you question your worth? 12-year-old Dre witnessed every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment his mother swallowed her pride. He watched her bite her tongue when Dalton forgot to include them in team photos. He saw her write check after check for equipment fees while other parents got mysterious discounts. The worst part? Dre blamed himself. He begged his mother to let him quit, convinced he was the reason for her struggles. But Nia refused to let prejudice win. "Baby, we don't run from challenges," she'd whisper on their drive home. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is show up when people expect you to disappear. What Dre couldn't understand was why his mother, who stood barely 5'4" and spoke softer than anyone in the room, never seemed intimidated by Coach Dalton's swagger. While other parents rushed to agree with his opinions, Nia remained unimpressed by his theatrics. She'd studied him for months, watched how he favored wealthy students, how he preached honor while practicing discrimination, how he used his authority to make vulnerable people feel small. Dalton thrived on making others feel inferior because it fed his need for superiority. He collected victories over people he deemed lesser, verbal justs with parents too afraid to challenge him, public dismissals of students who couldn't afford private lessons. But Nia Carter represented something different. Something that made him uncomfortable. She didn't seek his approval, didn't laugh at his inappropriate jokes, didn't scramble to prove she belonged in his world. Her quiet confidence unnerved him in ways he couldn't articulate. So he decided to do what bullies do when subtle intimidation fails: escalate to public humiliation. That Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by parents and students who hung on his every word, Coach Dalton saw his opportunity to finally put Nia Carter in her place. He had no idea he was about to meet the silent storm. Nia Carter. Coach Dalton's voice boomed across the academy, cutting through conversations like a blade. "How about you come down here and spar with me? Let's show everyone how a regular person handles a real martial arts challenge." The gymnasium fell silent for exactly 3 seconds before erupting in laughter. Parents covered their mouths, trying to stifle giggles. Teenagers pulled out phones, already anticipating viral content. Even some of the adult students smirked, settling back to watch what they assumed would be a one-sided demonstration. "Oh my God, is he serious?" whispered one mother to another. "Poor woman," muttered a father, already feeling secondhand embarrassment for Nia. Dalton basked in the attention, his chest puffed with false bravado. This was his domain, his moment to reinforce the hierarchy he'd spent years building. In his mind, this wasn't cruelty, it was education. A lesson about knowing your place. He expected Nia to decline gracefully, to make excuses about her work clothes, her lack of experience, her obvious physical disadvantage. He expected her to shrink away, confirming every assumption he'd made about her character. Instead, Nia Carter stood up. The laughter died in throats. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even Dre's eyes widened as his mother walked toward the center mat with measured steps, her expression unreadable. "If that's what you want, Coach," she said quietly, her voice carrying farther than any shout. "I accept." What happened next changed everything. As Nia stepped onto the mat, something shifted in her posture. Her shoulders straightened, her stance widened. The gentle mother who'd spent months enduring disrespect transformed into something else entirely. Something that made veteran fighters in the crowd take notice. Because 20 years ago, Nia Carter wasn't just any martial artist. She was the Silent Storm, a legend whispered about in underground fighting circles from Atlanta to Detroit. Undefeated in 37 professional matches. A woman who moved like water and struck like lightning. A fighter so skilled that opponents often conceded defeat before stepping into the ring with her. At 22, Nia Carter was destined for greatness. Sponsorship deals lined up. Championship belts within reach. A future that seemed limitless stretched before her. Until the night that changed everything. Marcus Williams, her fiancé and training partner, died in a car accident driving home from her biggest victory. The man who believed in her dreams, who pushed her to be better, who planned to propose after her next championship fight, gone in an instant. The guilt consumed her. She'd asked him to skip the after-party, to drive home early because she had morning training. If she hadn't been so focused on the next fight, if she'd left with him, if she'd made different choices, he might still be alive. Nia walked away from fighting that night and never looked back. She buried the Silent Storm along with Marcus, moved to a new city, started over as a single mother after discovering she was pregnant with Dre. Built a quiet life where no one knew her past, where no one expected greatness from her. For 20 years, she'd lived as just another struggling parent, another invisible woman that society overlooked. But standing on that mat, facing a man who'd spent months trying to humiliate her, those buried instincts awakened. This wasn't just about proving her worth to a bully. This was about dignity, about showing her son that strength doesn't come from size or status. It comes from refusing to let others define your value. This was about honoring Marcus's memory by finally standing up instead of staying hidden. Dre watched from the sidelines, his heart pounding with fear and pride. For the first time in his young life, he saw his mother not as the tired woman who worked 3 jobs, but as the warrior she'd always been inside. Coach Dalton, still basking in the crowd's attention, assumed his stance with theatrical flair. He'd done this before. Embarrassed, overconfident parents who thought they could hang with a real fighter. This would be quick, educational, and thoroughly entertaining for his paying customers. He had no idea he was about to face one of the most feared fighters of her generation. As the two opponents circled each other, the energy in the room shifted. Spectators who came for a joke found themselves witnessing something much more significant. Phones stayed raised, but now they were recording history instead of humiliation. The match was about to begin, and the Silent Storm was ready to remind everyone, including herself, why legends never truly die. They just wait for the right moment to return. Coach Dalton cracked his knuckles and rolled his shoulders, playing to the crowd like a seasoned performer. His warm-up routine was deliberate theater. High kicks that showcased his flexibility, shadow boxing combinations that emphasized his speed and power. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, earning another round of chuckles from the audience. Nia stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, watching him with the patience of someone who'd seen this show before. No flashy movements, no intimidation tactics, just quiet observation. The contrast was stark. Dalton bounced on his toes, muscles tense with aggressive energy. Nia remained motionless, her breathing steady and controlled. To untrained eyes, she looked helpless, a lamb about to be devoured by a wolf. Parents positioned themselves for the best camera angles. Students gathered around the mat's perimeter, phones ready to capture what they expected would be a quick, decisive victory for their instructor. "This is going to be brutal," whispered one teenage student. "I almost feel bad watching," replied another, though neither looked away. The timer started. Dalton opened with a basic jab-cross combination. Nothing fancy, just enough to establish dominance and give Nia an easy way out. He fully expected her to stumble backward, maybe even fall, providing him with the perfect opportunity to end this charade gracefully. Instead, his punches hit empty air. Nia had moved exactly one step to the left, her head tilted slightly, watching his fists pass harmlessly by. Her feet never shuffled. Her hands never came up in defense. She simply wasn't there anymore. Dalton blinked, momentarily confused. He tried again, this time with more conviction. A quick 1-2 combination followed by a leg kick, the kind of sequence that separated beginners from experienced fighters. Again, nothing. Nia flowed around his attacks like water, each movement minimal yet perfectly timed. She didn't block his strikes. She avoided them entirely, staying just out of range while making it look effortless. The crowd's excited chatter began to fade into confused murmurs. "Did you see that?" one parent asked another. "See what?" "She's just running away," came the dismissive reply, though doubt crept into the speaker's voice. Dalton's confidence faltered for the first time. These weren't lucky dodges. They were calculated defensive movements, the kind that took years to master. He stepped up his intensity, throwing combinations with real force behind them. Hooks that could drop an untrained opponent. Kicks that had ended sparring matches against experienced students. Nia continued her methodical evasion, her expression unchanged. Each attack missed by millimeters, close enough that spectators could see the precision required to avoid them, far enough that she remained completely untouched. "What the hell?" Dalton muttered under his breath, loud enough for the front row to hear. His movements became more aggressive, his technique sloppier. The controlled demonstration he'd planned devolved into genuine effort as frustration replaced his theatrical confidence. "Aren't you going to fight back?" he demanded, breathing harder than someone of his conditioning should after just 2 minutes of light sparring. Nia's response was a slight smile that never reached her eyes. The crowd's energy shifted dramatically. What began as anticipation for easy entertainment transformed into something else entirely. Parents stopped recording to lean forward, studying the woman they'd dismissed as helpless. "She's toying with him," observed an older gentleman who'd been training martial arts for decades. "That's impossible," his wife replied, but her voice carried uncertainty. Even the teenage students sensed something extraordinary happening. Their casual laughter died as they watched their intimidating instructor struggle against a middle-aged woman who seemed to be barely trying. Dre stood frozen by the wall, his hands pressed against his mouth. He'd seen his mother move around their small apartment, reaching for high shelves, cleaning tight spaces, always efficient and graceful. But this was different. This was the grace of someone who understood movement in ways most people never would. Drop a comment right now and tell me what you think happens next. Does Nia finally fight back, or does she continue making Coach Dalton look foolish without throwing a single punch? 3 minutes into the match, sweat beaded on Dalton's forehead while Nia remained completely composed. The hunter had become the hunted, and everyone in that gymnasium was starting to realize they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple sparring session. 5 minutes in, Coach Dalton's careful strategy crumbled into raw desperation. Gone was the theatrical showmanship. Gone were the measured techniques designed to impress spectators. What remained was a man whose reputation hung by a thread, fighting against an opponent who seemed to exist in a different dimension of space and time. His attacks became wild, uncontrolled. Overhand rights thrown with knockout power. Spinning kicks that would have hospitalized an amateur. Combinations that abandoned all defensive consideration in favor of overwhelming aggression. Each strike carried the weight of his wounded pride, his shattered assumptions, his growing panic at being made to look foolish in front of his own students. But Nia Carter had faced fighters with twice his speed and 3 times his skill. She'd weathered storms that made Dalton's tantrum look like a light breeze. While he exhausted himself throwing haymakers, she began to display why the silent storm had been whispered about in reverent tones across the fighting world. Her footwork transformed from simple evasion into pure artistry. She glided between his attacks, her movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. When he threw a right hand, she was already positioning herself for his follow-up left. When he launched a kick, she'd anticipated the angle and moved accordingly. But now she did something different. She began to counter, not with strikes, with positioning. Every time Dalton overcommit to an attack, Nia was there to exploit the opening he created. She'd appear beside him, behind him, always just close enough to touch, but never actually making contact. The crowd watched in complete silence as their understanding of what was happening shifted entirely. This wasn't a mismatch between a trained fighter and an amateur parent. This was a master class in martial arts being delivered by someone they'd all written off as irrelevant. "Dear God," breathed the elderly gentleman who'd recognized her skill early. "She's not just defensive, she's controlling the entire fight." Dalton's breathing became labored. Sweat poured down his face as he realized the horrible truth. He wasn't just losing to Nia Carter. He was being systematically dismantled by someone operating on a completely different level. The decisive moment came when his frustration peaked. Dalton threw everything into one final, desperate spinning back kick, a technique that had won him countless matches, a move that carried enough force to break ribs if it connected. Nia sidestepped with minimal effort, letting his momentum carry him completely off balance. As he stumbled forward, struggling to regain his footing, she moved with the precision of a surgeon. Her right hand reached out. Not in a strike, not in aggression, but in a gentle tap on his shoulder. The touch lasted maybe half a second, soft enough that it wouldn't bruise a child, controlled enough to demonstrate complete mastery over the situation. But that single tap said everything. "I could have ended this fight at any point. I could have hurt you badly if I'd chosen to. I'm letting you keep your dignity because that's who I am." Dalton froze completely. His eyes widened as the full implications of that gentle touch registered. Every person in that gymnasium understood what they'd just witnessed. Absolute dominance delivered with absolute grace. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but lasted only seconds. Parents stared with mouths open. Students forgot to breathe. Phones continued recording, capturing the exact moment when assumptions died and legends were reborn. Dre's eyes filled with tears of pride as he watched his mother, the woman he thought needed protecting, demonstrate the kind of strength that couldn't be taught, couldn't be faked, and certainly couldn't be dismissed. Nia Carter remained motionless in the center of the mat, her hands once again at her sides, her breathing steady and controlled. No celebration, no gloating, no need to prove anything further. The silent storm had spoken without saying a word. In that gymnasium, surrounded by witnesses who would retell this story for years to come, quiet strength had triumphed over loud arrogance. Dignity had defeated prejudice. A mother's love had conquered a bully's hate. The match was over. But the real lesson was just beginning. The silence stretched until Coach Dalton finally found his voice. He started, his words catching in his throat as 30 pairs of eyes watched his every move. His face flushed red, not from exertion anymore, but from the weight of complete humiliation. For 15 years, he'd ruled this academy through intimidation and arrogance. Now, standing before his students and their parents, he faced a choice that would define the rest of his career. He could make excuses, blame the lighting, claim he wasn't trying his best, dismiss what happened as a fluke. Or he could do something he'd never done in front of his students. Tell the truth. "I was wrong," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then, louder, with growing conviction, "I was completely wrong about you, Nia. about who you are, about what you're capable of, about everything. He turned to address the entire crowd, his usual commanding presence replaced by genuine humility. I let my pride and my prejudices blind me to the truth. I treated you with disrespect because I made assumptions based on how you looked, how you dressed, where you came from. I'm sorry, Nia. I'm sorry to everyone who watched me behave that way. The gymnasium remained silent, waiting for Nia's response. She stepped forward, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had defined her fighting style. Coach, martial arts taught me that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit or how loudly you can shout. It's about knowing who you are, having the courage to stand up when it matters, and treating every person with dignity regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Her eyes swept across the crowd, landing briefly on each face. True power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Today, everyone here learned that the quietest person in the room might have the most to teach us. Dre broke free from the crowd and ran to his mother, wrapping his arms around her waist. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he looked up at her with newfound understanding. "Mom, you're incredible," he whispered. "No, baby," she replied, kneeling to meet his eyes. "We all have incredible strength inside us. We just have to choose when and how to use it." The transformation at Harmony Martial Arts Academy began immediately. Within days, Dalton restructured his entire teaching philosophy. Classes became about building character alongside technique. Students who'd been overlooked suddenly found themselves receiving equal attention and encouragement. Parents who'd witnessed the match spread word throughout the community. The story of this silent storm's return became legend. Shared at dinner tables, discussed in coffee shops, retold at community centers across the city. New students enrolled specifically hoping to train alongside the woman who demonstrated that real strength has nothing to do with size, gender, or social status. Nia Carter had walked into that gymnasium as an invisible single mother struggling to pay her bills. She walked out as a beacon of hope for anyone who'd ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel small. What happened at Harmony Martial Arts Academy that day wasn't just about one woman winning a fight. It was about something far more powerful, the moment when prejudice met reality and lost. Nia Carter's real victory had nothing to do with her superior fighting skills. Her triumph was spiritual, social, and deeply personal. She proved that dignity can't be stolen, only given away, and she refused to give hers away. Every assumption the crowd had made crumbled in real time. The helpless single mother revealed herself as a former champion. The charity case demonstrated mastery that left a trained instructor speechless. The woman they'd dismissed as irrelevant became the most important person in that room. This confrontation exposed how quickly we judge others based on surface appearances. Coach Dalton saw secondhand clothes and assumed incompetence. He noticed her quiet demeanor and mistook it for weakness. He observed her struggle financially and concluded she was lesser than others. But Nia Carter had been carrying strength they couldn't comprehend, strength forged by loss, tempered by sacrifice, and refined by years of choosing grace over bitterness. Her decision to step onto that mat wasn't about proving herself to people who didn't matter. It was about honoring Marcus Williams' memory by finally refusing to hide. It was about showing Dre that his mother wouldn't be diminished by anyone's narrow vision of who she should be. The mother-son bond displayed that afternoon transcended typical family dynamics. Dre didn't just see his mom defend herself. He witnessed her demonstrate that love sometimes requires courage. That protecting your children means teaching them to stand tall when others try to make them feel small. Nia's example showed him that strength doesn't announce itself with noise and aggression. Real power moves quietly, speaks softly, and strikes precisely when necessary. The universal lesson echoed far beyond martial arts. Never judge someone's capabilities by their circumstances. The person cleaning your office at night might be a former CEO rebuilding after loss. The quiet student in the back row could be a genius processing information differently. The humble parent on the sidelines might be carrying skills, wisdom, and experiences that would astound you. Nia Carter's story reminds us that everyone deserves respect, everyone has hidden depths, and everyone carries battles we know nothing about. The most dangerous mistake anyone can make is assuming they know someone's worth based on a glance. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to remind the world and themselves who they really are. The story of Nia Carter's sparring match spread like wildfire throughout the community, becoming the kind of legend parents tell their children and coaches reference in their teachings. Within months, the academy's walls were covered with quotes about respect, humility, and never underestimating others. New students arrived specifically asking to train where the silent storm had made her return. The video of that match garnered millions of views, inspiring countless people who'd felt invisible or dismissed. But the most important transformation happened between a mother and her son. That evening, as they drove home from the academy, Dre asked, "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me you were famous?" Nia smiled, keeping her eyes on the road. "Baby, fame isn't what matters. What matters is knowing who you are inside, regardless of what others see on the outside." She pulled into their apartment complex and turned to face him. "Promise me something, Dre. When people try to make you feel small because of your skin color, your background, or anything else, remember this day. Remember that true strength lives within you. Stand tall, be proud of who you are, and never let anyone convince you that you're less than extraordinary." This is exactly what Rise Stories is about: resilience, injustice, stories, and excellence. Real people overcoming real challenges and showing us that strength comes in forms we never expected. If this story moved you, smash that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe for more incredible stories of people who refuse to be defined by others' limitations. Drop a comment telling us about a time you or someone you know was underestimated. I read every single one. Because next week, we're bringing you another jaw-dropping story about a young man who was told he'd never amount to anything, until he proved everyone wrong in the most unexpected way. You won't want to miss it.